Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here in Jerusalem for this very important conference on press freedom. The world continues to change rapidly, including the accelerated transformation of the world of journalism and the free press. Consumer habits have changed dramatically. The internet has enabled an unimaginable array of new sources of information. Much of it good and useful, some of it problematic, indeed destructive. The quest to maintain and evolve the role of journalism is ever more complex and challenging. Open societies cannot be maintained without a sustainable journalistic ecosystem. And at Google, we also know that our own business is far more effective and successful in open societies. We share a common objective, one which we can and should work towards together. The governments of the world are now beginning to regulate the internet. This is understandable. However, we must also recognize that this also raises challenges including direct and indirect impacts on the freedom of the press itself. I've had the accidental great fortune of spending my 5-decade career on the cutting edge of media, technology, and public policy, from satellites to news publishing to search engines. I don't say this to suggest I know the answers. In fact, I've often observed that I have simply had the opportunity to make more mistakes than anyone else, which I hope on a good day might lead to a better understanding of the questions we must ask to find the answers to those important questions. I am of the view that we need far more self-reflection on how journalism works or doesn't work in our digital age, from the consequences of emerging public policy to an understanding of how journalism can be meaningful and effective for younger generations who know little or nothing of the earlier foundations of journalism and its role in our societies. In 1974, I worked at the Public Broadcasting Service. We were building the first satellite network to deliver television programs to stations across the United States. Until then, distributing programs to stations was costly and cumbersome. Telephone lines were usually expensive. Tapes were often shipped serially from station to station. Satellites would and did change the face of television. It enabled dozens of new programming networks. It laid the foundation for the explosion of cable television. The number of channels in the United States multiplied from 5 to 500 within a decade. I remember when Ted Turner introduced the first all-news channel, CNN. His objective was to deepen news coverage beyond the 2-minute story. Since then, Turner's vision for dedicated news channels has devolved from thoughtful coverage to inexpensive and more combative opinion programming. At the beginning, there were channels for a wide array of special audiences. Today, the programming is reality shows and shark attacks, all owned by a handful of media companies. The expanded distribution of cable was left in the hands of a few, which in the mind of some was the rightful order of things. What's my point? The fight for share of voice will happen no matter the means of distribution. Those with real or perceived influence, be they governments or the private sector, will give no quarter to maintain and expand their share of voice, their share of influence. The internet expanded access to distribution. It lowered the bar, eliminated the friction for any voice seeking an audience. The audience might have to find you, but you can be found. Word can be spread. New audiences can meet new voices. It was the dream of free expression purists. At the dawning of the internet, many, including me, were optimistic. We believed the more free expression, the better. We believed our better angels would win, but we learned there was a dark side. We're not all angels. The internet enabled challenging and problematic behaviors. Understandably, governments are starting to regulate the internet, typically with good intentions, but often with unintended consequences that potentially damage the free expression and openness of the internet itself. Which leads to the fundamental question we face. How can we assure that evolving internet policy will enable an open and diverse press and not reinforce a specific political interest or prop up a legacy industry. I fear the open internet is slipping away from us, that our 25 internet years enabling the penultimate model of free expression was an aberration. The challenge of problematic expression can't be ignored. However, it's essential we understand and balance the risks to free expression itself. The slope is slippery. Some participants in the policy discussion see the internet as a threat to their share of voice, their share of influence. They'd rather turn the internet into a distribution environment like those that enabled their earlier success, where share of voice went to those with power and influence to command distribution. They would rather see more friction between new voices and the audiences they seek. They would prefer to see core concepts of free linking and fair use curtailed. They may campaign with noble words, but the bottom line is a desire to maintain prior dominance, to constrain the openness of the web, to reduce the diversity of voices it enables. I urge close attention. I urge journalists reporting on internet policy to dig beyond the memes, to not be blinded by short-term self-interest. The stakes are high for the future of journalism and for the future of open societies. We at Google support thoughtful internet regulation, to be clear. We only hope that it respects these key principles. Protect the open web and the open internet and the free expression it enables, and not a closed distribution system favoring the few. Enable a diverse free press, and protect against undue government influence that imbalances the news ecosystem. We trust regulation to have its intended effect, but I think, as we know, we should analyze the fine print. Will legislation that purports to address misinformation be effective while creating wide exceptions for politicians or any spin master calling themselves a journalist? Will legislation proposed by legacy interests seeking a return to their era of dominance constrain the open web and the opportunity it presents for a more diverse free press? The world has changed. More than ever, societies need quality journalism to understand their world and express their roles as citizens. The internet overwhelms us. It continues to change, click by click, with every glob of media it spits out. From the sweet memes of social networks to an endless array of opinionators and influencers. From the helpful tutorials and inspired dreams of video creators to hucksters and propagandists. From snapshots of cute grandkids to doctored photos of false righteous indignation. From thoughtful forays into innovative digital journalism to astroturf journalism funded by who knows who. It's a complicated media ecosystem composed of frightening simplicity. Our culture, our politics, and news reduced to memes and 280-character sound bites lacking context and substance. Our world is twisted and torqued. By daunting cultural memes we are induced to amplify, by bad ads offering false remedies, by politicians igniting the fears that he or she pledges to extinguish. Yes, there is thoughtful, fact-based journalism sprinkled in, hard to identify, and largely overwhelmed by the cacophonous, mind-numbing cicada buzz that is the collective expression of the internet. How does journalism perform its critical role in the midst of all that? How might we better understand how journalism is perceived in the societies we serve? Do our audiences understand the role of journalism? Do they know which sources to trust with their precious time and money? Is the explosion of inexpensive but popular opinion smothering the credibility of fact-based coverage? Is the drift towards partisan news making the problem worse? Do they understand what we think they understand? News sites seek subscriptions and memberships, making earnest pledges about the virtues of quality journalism. What small percentage of our societies understand any of that? Yes, we can demand more media literacy, but telling us 20 reasons we should eat more broccoli and less pizza is not enough. We need to explore new recipes for an enticing and healthy journalistic menu. How might news organizations better understand the needs of their communities? I ask publishers often these days what research they do. Typically, the answer is not much or none, or it's we study our logs, we analyze the traffic and our usage. Okay. But that says nothing about those who don't visit, nothing about what the audience values. One friend, a managing editor, told me, "I understand what my readers want." I wasn't about to pass judgment on my friend's wisdom, but I did ask, "Don't you expect your reporters to ask many questions before deciding what they know or don't know about an issue? So why not do the research? What information do communities need on a daily basis? What will build ties with the community? What will they value and what will they pay for? Do they respect your work? And why do they or not?" I work with emerging local news outlets around the world. I think there's reason for hope. Cityside, a nonprofit in California, and City News, a for-profit in Italy, have found sustainable success. They engage with their communities and understand their information needs. Their success is an opportunity that many local news entrepreneurs can benefit from. Accountability journalism is critical to the role of journalism, but it's important to address a community's broad information needs. Community events, local sports, obituaries. It's this service journalism that drives engagement, builds community ties, enables local advertising, and expands the audience for the accountability journalism they do provide. As David Wamsley of Canada's Globe and Mail noted, might we underpin the high church work with respect for all of a community's information needs? We've been working with emerging local news outlets around the world. We recently funded 37 local news research projects with our North American Innovation Challenge. And with newly closed rounds of our innovation challenges in the EU, Middle East, and North Africa, most of the projects are innovative approaches to answer those questions. I expect we'll learn a lot. How can journalism rebuild trust? 8 years ago, I joined Sally Lehrman to call for a focus on the declining trust in journalism. With the Trust Project, Sally has generated research and assembled principles and playbooks for news organizations to approach new approaches to transparency and trust. The Trust Project works with hundreds of news organizations around the world. But as Sally would admit, there is more to learn, more to do. Ulrik Hagerup and the Constructive Journalism Institute in Denmark pursues a different angle, rethinking the models, the formats, the linguistics used in our journalistic work. The word constructive is key. It's not news that makes you feel good. Constructive journalism goes beyond the typical coverage model with clear signals and clear intent to include the necessary context, the hows and the whys, and importantly, a consideration of how that calamitous event could be prevented. It's designed to seek common ground. When staging debates, they avoid divisive labels like crossfire. What better way to gain a society's respect than by demonstrating the power of journalism to help a community understand its challenges and address them? But how does a society understand its challenges? How can journalism avoid amplifying a society's distorted sense of risk? In the United States, we are 400 times more likely to die in a traffic accident than an act of terrorism. We are 35 times as likely to die from cancer or heart disease than from violent death in any form. Yet, research tells us we perceive those fears in reverse. Our fears of terrorism is exponentially higher than dying in our cars. We live in a landscape of distorted risk. We live in a society where our perceived fears are amplified such that we lose sight of our society's real challenges. Every day, we read about terrorism, home invasions, kidnappings, refugee flows, all the horrific but anomalistic events that occur in our modern world, as we should. However, unintentional news reporting plays an intrinsic role in molding perceptions of reality that conflict with actual reality. What should really concern me and my community? If I enter a polling booth with a distorted sense of societal risk, might that not skew how I consider various issues or candidates? If we believe the role of journalism is giving citizens the information they need to be informed citizens, might we provide more context? Was there a trend of home invasions, or was it a rare occurrence? Can we close the gap between irrational fear and rational fear? Can we build a foundation of statistical knowledge to help provide context? In the United States, Google started a project called Common Knowledge. It's an expansive corpus of data on thousands of topics across the United States. We're working with newsrooms like those of McClatchy and many others to make it easy for journalists to embed a nugget of data-driven context to distinguish a disturbing anomaly from a dangerous trend. How do we empower journalists with better tools? In the digital world, knowledge is often hidden in data, and data often hidden behind technical complexity. Can new tools allow reporters to pursue investigations that otherwise are impractical or manually daunting? The Panama Papers and Pandora Papers are extraordinary examples of high-impact journalism that's data-driven. What makes the work of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists doubly impressive is how they've empowered collaboration across newsrooms. I happen to sit on their advisory board, and it's been extraordinary seeing how they've developed and evolved and grown. At Google, we made progress with a set of tools called Pinpoint, interestingly developed here in Israel with our engineering team in Tel Aviv. These are tools for investigative journalists that analyze documents, images, hand-scrawled notes to understand and organize them at speed and scale. News from organizations from Boston to Tel Aviv have won major prizes. The Boston Globe won a Pulitzer using Pinpoint. Not that Pinpoint deserves the credit, but it did enable work to be done that otherwise might not have occurred. In Israel, we've worked with many newsrooms and worked with the Movement for Freedom of Information to support their collaborations with newsrooms across Israel. Every journalist needs better tools, saves their time, increases their superpowers, and we need them to have superpowers. How do we keep journalists safe and effectively working in areas of conflict? Just as digital technologies have changed the nature of conflict, so has it changed the nature of reporting on conflict. It has enabled new capabilities, but also created new risks. At Google, we developed the Advanced Protection Program to provide a range of products and tools to help keep journalists safe from digital targeting. And we offer Project Shield to protect news sites from all too frequent DDoS attacks that attempt to silence them. Here, too, it's an arms race. They come up with new methods of attack. We need to come up with new methods of defense. In the Ukraine, we worked with many organizations to support both their operational and technical needs caused by the war. For those efforts, we were honored to become the first company to receive the Ukraine Peace Prize. For those efforts, we're very pleased to have had those results. How might we adapt to the media forms our cultures are adopting? The underlying assumption of a democratic society and the profession of journalism is this: if we express our ideas with the right words, the right logical arguments, and if enough people read those words, then our democracies will be effective. The world will be a better place. Again, the internet and new media forms have rearranged social, political, and cultural structures. We see it with social media. We see it with short-form video. The messages get shorter, an inescapable progression or digression, as it were, of how we communicate, of how we understand the society we live in. We can't ignore it. Kevin Munger argues that forms of human conversation have an overwhelming influence on what ideas we can conveniently express. And what ideas are convenient to express inevitably become the important content of a culture. I'm not suggesting TikTok is the future of journalism, though in its own crowdsourced way, it is a medium of journalistic expression. We need to adapt to the language constructs of our time. These always change with generations, and they're changing dramatically today. Last but not least, how can we reach those who don't care or have lost interest? Only 10% of us regularly consume what we might call serious news. The Reuters Institute tells us even fewer pay for news. Single digits. We hear it from our friends. They avoid the news. It makes them sad or anxious or fearful. They find solace in other ways, binging the latest on Netflix or feeding their addiction to TikTok. I recall what Neil Postman wrote about television in 1985. We are amusing ourselves to death. He goes on to say in that book, he goes on to talk further about George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. What George Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Aldous Huxley feared was there would be no reason to ban books, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. As Huxley noted in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians, always on the alert to oppose tyranny, failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In Orwell's 1984, Huxley added, "People are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure." In short, Orwell feared what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. Sometimes hard words to think through. I suspect you're thinking Richard didn't mention the challenges of the business model in news. Everyone says it's broken. It's broken, and it's not. Yes, the model of rich, near-monopoly metropolitan newspapers will never return. In 1985, newspapers were the internet before there was one. But now we have the internet. Classified ads went to online marketplaces, department stores got smothered by e-commerce, printed food coupons became loyalty programs. There went that business model. But it's not broken for the journalism entrepreneurs I know, here and elsewhere. Paula Moraglia didn't launch Nexo Jornal in Brazil thinking she had no business model or path to success, nor did Infobuy in Argentina, nor did Village Media in Canada. They launched those ventures because they knew there were voids to fill, opportunities to harvest, and many are succeeding. Lots of hard work, long nights of stressful doubt, but they believe every day. And every day we see the proof. Publishers are optimistic. Juan Ifra's World Press Trends report said that digital was the primary driver of revenue growth over the past year. The digital marketplace is growing fast for publishers and even faster for advertisers. Digital advertising grew by nearly 17%, digital reader revenue by 14%. And editors agree. Take the UK as one example. John Witherell, editor of The Times, said, "It's not true that tech giants are killing us. Good journalism does not need saving, it's thriving." El Confidencial grew to 20,000 subscribers in 6 months, the best results they'd seen in 20 years. And Schibsted in Norway saw unparalleled growth in digital media subscriptions with 880,000 digital subscribers across their Norwegian and Swedish brands. It's no longer a question of whether news ventures can succeed. Now it's about sharing those formulas with those who have succeeded. How do we scale the success of some to many? With every advance in media distribution, there was an early phase of exploration, failure, success, evolution. Then it became clear what the models were. It became clear what would work in local radio, or in their time, alternate weeklies. We're now at that second phase, I think, in the digital world of news, where successful models can be propagated. Yes, I ask no questions specifically relating to the business model, because every question I've asked is critical to a successful news organization, both journalistically and financially. They're foundational. The answers are the path to success, whatever the answers might be. It was one of the great Greeks who said, "Our open societies, our democracies, will be destroyed by the freedoms we enable." Wise words, terrifying words. They hit a little too close to home. The political sphere has adapted to the capabilities of the internet to speak to voters, to build political alliances far more quickly and effectively than the world of journalism. We see the impact around the world. The trend is concerning, as concerning to me and to Google as it is to you. Right? What, 15 democracies have elected authoritarian leaders? As I noted, Google's success is greatest in open societies. The impact of journalism is also greatest in open societies and necessary to their maintenance. We have common objectives. We have a common sense of mission. It's why I'm passionate about the work that I do. When journalism succeeds, we all do better. Our commitment is stronger than ever. We want to do more. We will do more. And I think through trusted partnership, we'll get there. We need to innovate together because the world will keep changing. We need to address change together. We need to understand how each other works and how we can achieve mutual benefit. We're in this together for the long term. I'm in this together for the long term. And I hope you'll be there with me. I thank you for your attention.